Right, so I'm going to talk to you about multi-generational melting in the Indian Himalaya. And what I hope everyone will get out of this talk is an understanding of how the rocks I study can tell us about the processes happening deep inside a mountain belt. For a brief geological context, my rocks are from the location of this red star up in the Indian Himalaya. It's not very far from the border with China. And here is a geological map of the Himalaya. I sampled from a particular rock unit called the GHS, and it's colored in blue on this diagram. That's the main thing you need to see. What's important about the GHS is that it can be found right the way across the entirety of the mountain range. So this GHS is particularly important to the structure and evolution, the structure and evolution of the Himalaya, because it has experienced pressures and temperatures high enough to melt some of its components. These rocks that have partially melted and since crystallized, we term migmatites and leucogranites. The GHS is sandwiched between the Indian and Asian tectonic plates and bound on by faults on either side. And while there is molten material present, in effect these migmatites and leucogranites, the unit is effectively squishy. And so much like when you cut into a cake, the GHS filling is being squeezed out from between India and Asia. In the GHS, there are three major rock types. This first one is called a gneiss. It's formed under high pressures and temperatures, but it has not melted at all. The next rock type is called a migmatite. This rock has partially melted and has lost a lot of its original structure. And finally, we have what we call a leucogranite, a rock that has entirely crystallized out from a magma or a melt. So in order to learn more about the change from a gneiss, a metamorphic rock, through to a leucogranite, we have to look to particular minerals that form during this process. For my research purposes, this mineral is zircon, and here is a single grain of zircon from one of my samples that has been cut in half and pictured using cathodoluminescent imaging. This allows us to see the tree ring-like growth pattern inside the crystal that grows from the inside out in the presence of melt. Zircon is a very hardy mineral, and as such, these inner layers or zones are often very old and inherited from previous geological events. Therefore, we're most interested in this darker outer layer. So naturally, the best thing to do is fire lasers at these areas to collect information about their source material using oxygen isotopes, their date of crystallization using uranium, thorium, lead isotopes, and also various other information about the magma chemistry from trace elements. But we don't just look at individual grains, we use populations to make charts like this one. It's a probability density plot showing the frequency of particular ages of grains. With this, we can look at processes occurring across the entirety of the sampled region. We can plot the migmatite data up in the same way, and we can compare how the migmatite ages look against the leucogranite ages. One comparison is the age of peak occurrence. For the leucogranites, this is at 16.5 million years ago, while for the migmatites, it is at about 20 million years ago. This gives us a 3.5 million year gap between the time in which most zircon crystallized in the migmatites and the leucogranites. This lag can potentially be interpreted as the time taken for magma or melt from the migmatites to clump together into larger bodies and then travel from their source, the area that they melted as migmatites, up until their final resting place of crystallization as leucogranite. If we look at just the migmatite data, we can infer that this region I sampled in the GHS would have had a molten component semi-continuously for almost 20 million years. This is possibly the squishiness of the GHS that I mentioned earlier. Also, the older zircon forms a population in the migmatites that appears to be absent from the leucogranites. We can try and investigate this further by dropping down to a smaller sampling scale. So Here's one of my sampling localities. It's a cliff face, and a cliff face like this is not unique to the Himalayas. You could expect to see something like this in any mountain belt environment, young or old. So here I have colored in various features to make them stand out more. In yellow, we have the most prominent feature, and this is a leucogranite, and it's a dike structure. So it's a term we use to describe one rock that has cut its way through another. It is intruding into this uncolored host rock, which is a migmatite. And around it, there are this blue color, which are these skinny dikelets structures that are woven in amongst the migmatite and also join up occasionally to the larger leucogranite. We can take the zircon populations collected from each of these three rock groups and see how they compare in both the age and the source using oxygen isotopes as a proxy. So the migmatites, much like the regional population, shows a wide range in ages, so from about 40 to 20 million years ago, as well as a fairly diverse source value. The leucogranite, however, is constrained to a much younger age and much more defined source value, and that sits at around 19 to 13 million years. And finally, you have the blue skinny dike structures, which seem to overlap both. This older grain sample, sampled grain, is probably inherited, and so as this area is melted, a zircon has popped out from the migmatites, intruded into, and hasn't grown any new stuff. But the fact that it sits in between the two is interesting. So what does this tell us? Well, we have a relatively young leucogranite body that is intruding into a group of migmatites that have been producing magma for a long time before this leucogranite ever arrived. There has likely been some interaction between the two of them, given the overlap in age and in source, and as well as the skinny dikelets. But the oxygen isotope values suggest that the leucogranite has had significant input from a source other than this one. The rocks we see at the surface, the reason for this is the rocks we see at the surface are only part of the picture. The leucogranites we can sample today have only had partial input from the migmatites that accompany them at the surface, while the rest came from rocks deep below the surface. And likewise, the migmatites we can sample had significant input into leucogranites that have now long been eroded away and are sand in the Bay of Bengal. All this points towards a conveyor belt model of semi-continuous or pulsing melt generation, aiding the extrusion of the GHS, making it squishy. So in summary, zircon grains record information about the magma they form in. We can study populations of zircons to see how long melt might have been present in a particular region. Because the Himalayan migmatites and leucogranites are relatively young, when we study these on an outcrop scale, we can look at it at very high temporal resolution and make inferences about things maybe 500,000 years apart. Combining data and observation points, combining data and observations point towards a conveyor belt model of pulsing melt generation in the GHS.